Welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of the 6 M's of Manufacturing podcast. I'm your host, Adrienne Temple. When working in manufacturing, providing a safe workplace for all employees is paramount. However, because the work being done still relies on decisions made by people, the path to safety excellence can be a challenging one. In this episode, we are joined by David Lynn, CSP, owner and founder of Peak Safety Performance, LLC, as he discusses ways to develop an effective safety culture and what it takes to adapt our safety approach to continually evolving work environments. Take a listen. David, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk about safety with you.
Good morning. It's good to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, I'm really excited to kind of dig into this safety topic simply because we really haven't touched on this at all with the podcast so far. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to get a little bit deeper into the details around creating safety culture. So I wanted to start with just understanding, what are those key components of developing an effective safety culture? Because so many companies will say safety, quality, production in that order, right? We always say it's priority number one, but saying and executing are two very different things. So from your perspective, what are those key components of developing an effective safety culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when you look at a bell curve of companies that are good to great, and the average the average company, I think, is good at doing basic OSHA stuff well. And I think that's important. It's definitely a keystone. But I think the top end of the curve, where people really excel, there's three main things I think help build a safety culture, or a culture that's focused on safety in all the work they do. I think the number one thing they have to consider is they have to have a character for safety, meaning they make decisions based on what's right and what's safe, and they can make hard decisions even when the production side of things, quality side of things can want to push us to contradict that. So I think doing things safe when nobody's looking is really the best way to look at safety character. Good companies do that, but there's also a tougher side, the mentality. I've worked around a lot of companies in my career, good and great, and the ones that are really excel, they have a sort of a mentality where they are driven to get better. They're not satisfied with where they are, no matter how good they are, and so there's almost a competitive grit to how they approach safety, and they take extreme ownership of it, and it's never something they pass off. So you combine that with the character side and the mentality side, it creates a good sort of triangle of leadership when you throw in just what they measure. So it's not all just about a recordable rate. It's about, I think great companies realize that safety is not just about that one number. It's about the safe habits the organization has and the individuals have.
Yeah, so let's talk about the metrics just briefly. Because, we always say what gets measured gets improved, right? We want to drive the right types of behaviors in what we measure as well, and not get lost in, and this happens not just for safety, for other initiatives as well, that sort of activity as progress model. Check the box.
Right.
I've done so many observations,
Right.
whether they were really effective or not, or whether I tried to change the behavior while I was doing the observation.
Mhm.
How do what kind of metrics should people be looking at, or what are some best practices around that? Because I think people struggle with that. It gets into an
Right.
exercise of just checking a box and you lose the meaning behind it.
That's a great point, and it's sort of a frustration on safety and management in general, because as a safety person, I want to measure participation, and so I look at it as that's a sort of a first level of measurement where you have to make sure people are doing something. So it's hard to take that check the box measurement out, but I think the quality of those measurements are the bigger challenge. So I think being able to review what people are learning in the process is a key. So some of the more subtle things you do as a management team is you look at, okay, we did so many observations this week as a leadership team. Now let's talk about what we learned. And so that's a little bit harder to measure, though. But if you build into your structure where you have conversations about what you went out and observed, it helps make the quality of those observations better. Because I think engagement is probably one of the secret ingredients to good safety. And so if you've got teams going out and doing stuff like that, it helps. to
Yeah, absolutely. I just feel like people struggle with that part of it. Another part is, like you said, some companies may be more sophisticated or really effective at some of more of the critical OSHA type topics because they have to
right,
be on top of those. But how do you really get people to embrace safety, feel well educated? Because a lot of the things that happen in safety, at least from my experience in manufacturing, is like, hopefully it's not the major injuries associated with like a
right,
lockout, tagout incident, but more, it's you're kind of suffering from a lot of things that probably could have been avoided, sprains,
right.
strains, cuts. I mean, how do you educate your workforce in a way that they're cognizant of those just very commonplace things that can happen, but are very much avoidable?
Right. I read an article in the National Safety Council magazine that said that we make 30,000 decisions a day. And out of that 30,000 decisions, think about it, 3,000 of those have a safety implication. Where if you go too fast, too slow, turn left, turn right, everything can have a safety implication, which creates kind of enormous amount of frustration on people trying to make sure nothing bad happens because you can't monitor 3,000 decisions. You can't control that completely. So I think there is a blunt end and a sharp end of the process. To me, the sharp end is really the where the activity takes place, the final decision and judgment. But the
Hmm.
blunt end is really everything upstream that a supervisor does to plan, audit, check, and monitor, and the support that an organization provides upstream to support good, solid safety habits. And I think about each one of those organizationally, supervisor wise, as filters for employees at that sharp end. And so sometimes when we get caught up in just thinking solely about the actual decision being made that seems random, it's not really as random as you think when you consider the filters upstream an organization puts in place, the filters that a supervisor puts in place. And so what we do is focus on those filters and help employers be able to not just get caught up in the random decision somebody made, but understand how we could have influenced it upstream. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
It does. It really does, because most of the incidents that you see happen, that, like you said, why were you didn't have to rush, you should have been paying attention. Why were you at, safety's first? Well, that's one thing. We know that's
Right,
true, but then what are we really nurturing in general
right,
in our work environment to kind of, is production at the utmost importance at that time? Are we
right,
behind, and are we unintentionally encouraging behaviors that we know might be potentially risky?
right. Well,
And
we do that all the time, and if you think there are error precursors, meaning you can predict when people are gonna make mistakes, and we don't think about safety like that. We focus on right at the point of attack, but in reality, every injury I say every, just general statement, the majority of things I've investigated through the years, there was a bad decision, bad judgment on a lot of cases, but you could have anticipated and predict that error upstream. When people get frustrated, they get in a hurry, or when they get too many things going on, or they get pressure from other directions. Those are indicators. And so they're harder to proceduralize, or you can't checklist them out of the process. But as a good supervisor, you have to recognize when people are getting overextended or when they get in that mode, because ultimately that can tell you what's going to happen next and take form in a lot of different ways. So I think the best, strongest safety environments I've been around, you have leaders that are able to anticipate errors and mistakes like that. So I think that's where the focus comes, and it seems a little abstract in a lot of ways, but it's really about style and how you lead.
hmm let's talk a little bit about, because I think a lot of people right now are experiencing, especially manufacturing, that sort of shift in the workforce, right? So a lot
Mhm.
of transition of those more seasoned people. Not that your seasoned employees cannot get injured; they do. Ideally, you don't want them to, but there is potential, right? But when we look
Right.
at the workforce currently, there's a transition, a lot of
Mhm.
new people that have never worked in these types of environments. And I think that's where we rely very heavily on our training in the
Right.
beginning to fully educate them of all the risks and make them aware. And I think we all know how difficult that can be because in the first 90 days, you're still trying to learn a job and keep yourself safe. I mean, from a training standpoint and what you see happening in that space, I mean, how are people overcoming that? Because you can throw a lot of SOPs at people and you
Right.
can talk about safety and all of the OSHA topics, but it's a lot to absorb
It
early on.
is.
Are there other ways to that people are doing this?
Absolutely. I think you have to learn you really have to understand how people learn new jobs. There's three performance modes people have. They have sort of a uh, a knowledge-based mode where they're just learning, they don't know what they don't know. After they've been in that role for a while, they're still learning in a rule-based kind of mode, meaning they haven't experienced everything yet to solve the problems. And then you have skill-based people that still make errors, and each one of those performance modes, people make errors at different rates. So I think good learning organizations can help each of those groups in different ways. You know, whether it's classroom training for knowledge-based people and demonstration and a lot of hands-on coaching, that helps that knowledge-based group. But rule-based people who have been there a while, they still need the opportunity to have the resources to process decisions, encouragement to look in the right places. And then skill-based people really need to kind of help in the process. So, you know, if you look at how people learn, a hard focus on those three performance modes helps minimize errors, putting people in positions they're ready for rather than throwing them to the wolves, so to speak. So that's one thought. The other thing is I think we have to understand the full range of learning. You know, in adult learning, we remember 10% of what we hear in a classroom, but we put all of our effort in a classroom setting, a computer-based setting, or stuff like that. We tend to look at that as training, and it is, but it's only 10% of what people comprehend. And so I think we need to shift our thought processes to how do we help with the other 90%. And that's where people are learning hands-on. And I think mentoring programs are good for that. You know, different progression and where you put people, place people, how you teach them in that other 90%, because honestly, that's more important than what they hear in a classroom. So I think companies that understand that it's broader than just the video you show or the presentation you show or the test you give them. They have to connect what they saw with what the reality is. Does that make sense? That's one way.
Yeah, yeah, it certainly does. I mean, in my experience, a lot of times it was, trying to push through so much information in a classroom setting. And ideally, when you're training on the floor, hopefully
Right.
safety is getting translated, right? But that's where
Right.
we get very much focused on the task at hand and getting you to be proficient at performing the task. And sometimes we forget that we
Yeah.
need to make sure that we're really impressing upon them the importance of doing it safely because
Right.
injury could happen. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a very good point that you made.
Well, think about how. Well, I mean, it's a good idea and it's a good thought conceptually, but if I'm the supervisor, I'm like thinking, well, what do you want me to do, David? I said, well, I think there's a few things a supervisor can do. I mean, think about this. Engagement is ultimately one of the best ways we all learn. So we need to spend time walking an area, a floor, a machine with them with employees, showing them what you're looking for as a supervisor, but also not just trying to dictate and show, but let them talk to you and tell you what they're experiencing. We need to have a posture of learning ourselves as a management team and not just think we have all the answers. So I think that personal one-on-one, let's go walk this line and look at it, is a learning tool. I think that's how I think audits are a great learning tool. They're not just a gotcha tool. And so doing audits can teach people how we see things. So that's a route that I think that makes sense is being able to plan out your day, but use that engagement side. But one of the cool things that we've been looking at is I've been fascinated with micro learning kind of concepts because in today's world, you people learn different. And I'll give you an example. Some a couple months ago, you know, I've got three boys. They're in their 20s, and so they were all at the house for something. and probably they were hungry. And so they, I'm watching them play on their phones in the living room. And so they're joking around, carrying on, and showing each other video clips. And I started thinking, how in the world do we get so sucked into just flipping through videos on a phone? And it's something in our brains that just draws us to that's magnetic. And in my thought process, I'm thinking, man, if I could just have material that safety related that could just draw people into something like that and just flip, 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 but in a safety context, learning. It's kind of a micro learning thought process, but to me, it's like a TikTok swipe mentality too. And so my boys, they like to play around and develop TikTok videos. And I told them, said, y'all need to develop me some safety videos that people will just be drawn to. And they're like, what do you mean? And so I told them. And so next thing I know, they had played around and developed an AI version of me. They called him Safety Dave. And it was a legit AI. Well, it didn't look like me, thank goodness. It didn't sound like me. It had a better voice than me. That's better. But they called him Safety Dave. And they took a news alert that they pulled off, just an AP news alert on something that happened in the workplace. And they took the text out of the newspaper, put it into an AI version voice, and created a 60-second safety alert with AI, just like that. And I thought, holy cow, and then it's actually interesting because they put all their other stuff swinging in and out and some noise effects, and it was professionally done, but with a different mentality focused on stuff. And they're like, Dad, those safety videos people show, and they just went off on sitting through PowerPoints, how nobody pays attention. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're kind of right, but what else am I supposed to do? And so it's funny, we're testing out different thought processes like that to utilize AI and not just stage, somebody standing up talking and speaking, but use that younger generation swipe mentality to teach people small bites, 60 seconds, 60 seconds, 60 seconds. And I think, I don't know, I just think there's great opportunity in that realm. Does that make sense?
And absolutely, because like you said, people are on their phones a lot. They're more likely to consume video on social media than they are anything else. So you're definitely adjusting to the audience and how people absorb material and how they can embrace it. I think the more relatable it can be, the better. The challenge I always had, as a member of the management team, we were on a rotation to go through the annual safety topics. And so we would all teach a different topic to several different shifts on a certain day. And like you said, it's a PowerPoint presentation. It's heavy with what the OSHA material says.
Right.
Not really any examples. So again, you're disconnecting it from your everyday life or practical applications in your workspace. And so you felt like, to your point, people are struggling to stay awake because they work 12 hours,
Right.
struggling to pay attention. And so you just don't really have a captive audience, and you didn't really connect the dots for them. So I think that's really outstanding that y'all are looking at more innovative solutions
Right.
for just translating some of this stuff in a meaningful way. So I'm excited to see Safety Dave. I can't wait for this.
Well, good. Well, and it's really still in a trial phase too, because there are certain things we have to do by the book, OSHA covered stuff. And so unfortunately you can't totally get away from just that pure rote, just push out the information and like hitting all the points that OSHA requires you to hit. I mean, there's always going to be that element where we have to check a box in a regulatory perspective. But you know what? If you can break things down into small bites, 60-second clips about lockout issues, electrical issues, machine guarding issues, and without getting graphic and gory, you can still sit there and teach people things. And so I think we have to adapt to the new mind, basically. And I think it's sort of a swipe safety innovation that's out there. And I haven't seen it may be out there, but I've looked for those short clip type stuff. But I think a lot of developers, they don't want to do things short of the whole package because they I don't know, they don't want to be out of compliance, I guess. But the idea is that people learn in small bites, and so give them something interesting that make them laugh, make them smile a little bit, and give it sort of tap into the emotional side of learning. And I think we can pick up, we can do a better job.
Absolutely. I think it's just an innovative way to look at teaching safety in a different way. Like you said, not getting away from what's important, but the more relatable it is or the more engaging it is, the more
Right,
likely they are to remember it, right? You're looking for recall, right?
right,
So that's a great way to do it because everybody seems to remember videos that they've watched and told their
right.
friends about or shared with their friends. So I think it's a good way to get better retention of the important things. I think that's a great way to look at it. From a technology standpoint, I do want to ask this question because I've been reading some articles and I'm just curious what your take is on it. So many manufacturers, definitely not all, a small percentage are starting to transition to leveraging more technology on the manufacturing floor in terms of cobots and some automation of processes. How does that, from your perspective, sort of shift the safety landscape? I think there's some thoughts that obviously cobots, because they can potentially be in more harmful environments and because you don't have to put a person in that situation, there's some benefits, perhaps some ergonomic benefits, but how does that shift the safety landscape? Because I'm sure there's still risks involved, there's still things to think about, and then interfacing now as a person with a cobot. I mean, what are you seeing there as this space continues to evolve from a safety perspective?
Well, there's cool stuff out there that sort of make you think, oh wow, yeah, that'd be interesting. But I think all of it can be done with the idea that you can't take the personal side out of safety. And the fact of the matter is people get hurt doing human things, So a technology like that can't take the human side out. So we still have to be able to engage, but being able to, yeah, I sit there and think there's different systems out there that monitor areas. It can tell you when people are over certain lines or forgetting certain things, or there. And I think as long as it's not a too big brother like, I think it can be useful. I think I did have one client that showed me a presentation of, they had a safety robot that was supposedly going to track through their facility, taking pictures of everything. And I thought, I don't know how well that'd go over in certain places, but the idea is good. I just don't want us to take out the personal side of safety, and because I can get hurt doing mundane things, So I think being able to utilize it without forgetting that, I think is important. So which type of safety technology do you feel like people are gravitating towards right now in your world?
Well, I think a lot of the more of the technology is primarily people looking for automation of processes and cobots because that's sort of a good entry point,
Yeah,
but I was just having a conversation last week with one of our regional VPs, and it occurred to me that there's probably opportunity from a safety standpoint to back up and look at ways that we have lots of technology that can you can pull up SOPs and things like that. And that's probably where a lot of the focus is, like quality checks. And so real time on the
right,
shop floor, being able to do that. And we were really getting deep into a conversation about, yeah, but what if you can pop up all of your lockout, tag out procedures, which are supposed to be posted on the equipment, right? But what if that way they stay up to date with everything,
right,
'cause things do change, the accessibility to some of those types of things, going ahead and notifying them of the hazards because we have a
right,
lot of cross training happening as well. So, are there ways to make sure it's at top of mind if you're working on this equipment when you're pulling up all of these things at the station?
right,
Here's a way to keep it at the forefront. So, it's just a really good conversation about ways that we can integrate more than just the things that we tend to focus on, which are process related,
right,
SOPs and quality checks and things we're trying to document. Safety is very much an integral part of that. I don't know if everybody's using it in that application, but I think that's a really good way to be a little bit more proactive and making
mm,
sure those things are current and easily accessible so people don't get out of a habit of looking at their lockout tagout procedures. Oh, I couldn't find it. It must have been taken down when they did a PM on the equipment.
right.
It's here, right? It's accessible. So I think there's ways that technology on the safety side can be leveraged and is already available, but maybe people aren't using it in that capacity, perhaps.
Right. I think accessibility is huge. I mean, people, if people have to go look for things, they won't. So when it comes to safety stuff, safety material, procedures, topics, whatever, it's important that people can put their hands on it really quick. So I like some of the ideas out there where you can, a lot of QR code driven stuff where you can pull things up, a lot of easy access out on floors through everything from iPads to phones. So there's a lot of software systems out there that do that, and I think that's important to blend those systems that match your culture and organization. And so there's great companies out there to help do that. Now there's some other ones out there too that will give you real time data on ergonomic stuff. I've worked around and seen companies that wear belts that will track real time data on movements, good and bad, and you can watch that and see where employees are doing things the right way, wrong way, and coach and check and make improvements driven by real time data like that, which is a great technology driven process. On the cobot side, I think for the robots and different things of that nature, I think it's about how you integrate safety measures in and around that equipment, because it can inherently eliminate a lot of risk and danger for employees. But by the same token, when you have to adjust, and when you have to align, and when you have to program and stuff like that, you have to have good procedures to do it the right way, or else people end up with hands and fingers in the wrong places. So I think a lot of that it takes away things, but it can create other things. And so it's good stuff, but you have to monitor and watch and assess, how it's applied.
Yeah. Yeah, that's understandable. Everybody's still getting used to this idea of, and cobots, some are not very big, but like you said, how you
Yeah,
program them, if you're not careful and thinking about it, you could create risks you didn't even know were there. So, I think that's a very good point as people start to embrace more technology on the plant floor. I think one thing that I wanted to cover before we close this out is because you talked about it earlier, and how do you, with all this other technology, just like you talked about, being able to monitor things real time, and like you said, there can be, if you're not careful, that sense of sort of big brother being watched,
right.
right? How do you, when you look at cultures and way that organizations that are successful at safety have been able to do this, how do you take information like that and engage the right way so it doesn't feel punitive, that it's really
Right.
exploratory and understanding situational behaviors? What's the best practice around that? Because I think that's usually lacking. We see things, we respond to things, and sometimes we forget this is just people being people,
Right.
and nobody goes to work trying to get hurt or
Right.
trying to do the wrong thing. So what's your read on that?
We have to take a different approach that actually yields some better information from a different perspective. So, for example, in safety, we typically look for what's wrong. What is the one thing, the one action, the one condition, the one engineering issue that's wrong. But if you consider the fact that people work 99.9% of the time without getting hurt, they obviously know how to do the job without getting hurt around all kinds of equipment. So we need to frame the questions different about how do you do this job without getting hurt. And so when they describe how they do it, they can describe how they're avoiding certain things. And it's easier to talk about it that way rather than just randomly say, well, I could get hurt doing this. It can become a part of the discussion. So I think one of the best tools that you'll see a lot of companies using now in the human performance arena is they use learning teams. So think about how this works, and it's similar. I'll say similar. It has some attributes of like a root cause analysis without anything bad that's happened, but they'll take a process, a chemical or a piece of equipment or just something that has potential risk to it, and they'll sit down in learning teams and walk through how this process is done, and then and I think the leaders of that process, supervisors, managers, again, have to take on a learning posture to understand the steps that it takes to get that process completed safely. And so learning teams in a consistent, methodical system help do what you're talking about. It helps us learn what's going on. And I kind of use just a quick tool, just it's not a full-blown team, but when I ask people questions, I usually focus on how they plan their steps. What are some critical steps? I ask them questions about risk, around how they evaluate hazards, but I ask them not OSHA questions, but well, what energy sources do you have? Do you have any pressure, electrical, chemical? And I go through about 9 or 10 different energies that it helps them address or identify things easier. And I always ask about errors. Where do you get frustrated? Where do you get in a hurry? Where do you feel pressure to get this done? And then that way we have a discussion about some of the things that aggravate people, and they don't. And I think that's a good insight. And then you can talk about controls. And so I think the learning team mindset, the questioning attitude, those are things that you can't fully proceduralize, but if you build it into the culture, you'll have a culture that hopefully you'll have a culture willing to get back, driven to improve. And you can't improve without getting the perspective of people that do the work. And so it's not a totally brand new concept, but I think the emphasis on just asking great questions and be consistently willing to do that, I think it helps.
I do agree that definitely. I mean, it's a good practice. And right now, when you look at where a lot of organizations are from a people standpoint and a transition of workforce and lots of new people, it's a really great opportunity to uncover things through discovery that might be causing frustration and could be a source of future injury. So yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I think that's a great approach to it because like you said, it's all about people still are doing the jobs, and there's a lot of things that happen that perhaps don't bubble up where they're visible for you. So I think that's a great way to get feedback from the floor, make sure we really understand what's happening versus what we think is happening or what our SOPs say is happening,
Right.
and use that information to the benefit of everybody who might be doing that job in the future. So I think that's a really great way to look at that. David, I just really want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today. I think you provided a lot of insight that other people that are looking to sort of improve their safety performance or really tap into their workforce to improve safety overall. I think there's a lot of things there that they can use, and just really appreciate your time today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the 6 M's of Manufacturing podcast. Special thanks to David Lynn for sharing his safety expertise and some great takeaways on how to develop an effective safety culture. Visit the episode notes for details and reference links to information shared during today's discussion. Did you enjoy this episode? That's awesome. Follow our podcast and share with your network. And remember, don't just make it better.